a former Navy SEAL came home through a brutal blizzard, thinking he had already lost everything. Then, on an empty frozen road, he saw his German Shepherd stumbling through the snow, barely alive. But the deeper shock was still waiting for him at home, behind a locked door and a stranger's voice. Someone had tried to erase his place, his past, and even the one soul that never stopped waiting for him. What this loyal dog endured in silence would lead him to a truth more painful than war. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and help us reach 1,000 followers, so we can keep bringing you more meaningful stories. By the time Rowan Hale crossed the county line into White Pine Hollow, the afternoon had already begun to sink into a darker shade of winter. Snow came hard and slantwise across the windshield, thick enough that the wipers seemed less like tools and more like prayers. The sky above the northern pines had turned the color of old steel, low and bruised, and every mile of road looked lonelier than the one before it. The truck heater pushed out dry warmth that never quite reached Rowan's hands. He kept both of them on the wheel anyway. Broad palms, steady, knuckles, pale, posture upright, with the old discipline that had lived in his body so long, it no longer felt separate from bone. At 35, Rowan still looked like the kind of man who had once belonged to dangerous rooms, and would know how to leave them alive. He stood about 6 feet tall, lean and compact rather than bulky. His strength carried close to the frame. His face was clean, shaven, all square jaw and clear cheekbones, with the severe honesty of a man who had never learned how to wear softness for strangers. His dark brown hair was cropped in a military cut, a little longer than regulation now. And there was weather in him already, the northern wind roughening his fair skin to something harder. Older, his eyes were gray, blue. People who met them too long often looked away first, not because they were cruel, but because they were calm in a way that suggested they had seen too much and survived anyway. He wore the same clothes he had been wearing for most of the long return north. An old military gray tactical combat shirt, soft with age, frayed lightly at the cuffs and shoulders, weather, faded in uneven places underneath it. A dark red thermal layer showed at the collar. His combat pants were old earth, brown with hints of moss, green, worn at the knees, the cargo pockets sagging slightly from years of use. His work boots were scarred, his old military watch scratched at the face. Nothing about him was theatrical. He looked like a man made of use. He had imagined this drive too many times, not the storm, not the emptiness, but the end of it. He had imagined the bend in the road where the lake first appeared through the trees, the mailbox leaning a little to the left because he had never gotten around to fixing it properly. The porch light burning warm against dusk, Elise opening the door in surprise. One hand at her throat, the old disbelief melting into laughter or tears or anger that he had taken so long, he would have accepted any of it, as long as it meant she was there. And Rook, God, Rook. Rook racing out so hard his paws would slide on the packed snow, ears forward, eyes bright, body all motion and certainty, as if no time at all had passed. That picture had carried Rowan farther than food and medication and paperwork ever had. Then he saw the dog. At first, it was only a shape moving badly through the blur of snow ahead, low against the road shoulder, half lost each time the wind thickened. Rowan eased off the gas. Something about the gate snagged him before his mind could name why. The animal stumbled, recovered, stumbled again, too thin, too deliberate, not wild. He pulled over hard enough that the tires crunched deep into the drifted edge of the road. The truck rocked once and settled. For 1 second he sat frozen, hand on the door handle, fear arriving before recognition. Then he was out in the cold, boots sinking, the wind slapping tears into his eyes. The dog turned its head, black along the ears and back. Cream, gray through the ruff and legs. Harness black with a dark red trim nearly buried under crusted snow and grime. Rook, Rowan said, but it came out broken, like a word dragged over stone. The German Shepherd tried to come toward him. Rook was 6 now. A large working line dog built once for endurance and command, for long hikes, quick turns, and the silent understanding that passes between a disciplined animal and the person it trusts most. Even starved nearly down to angles, there was still something unmistakably noble in him. His amber eyes lifted to Rowan with effort and certainty both. His body was too thin. His coat, once thick and clean, was clumped with ice and old dirt. One rear leg lagged behind the others. But he knew him. That was the unbearable thing. He knew him instantly. Rook took 3 steps and almost folded. Rowan got there in time to catch his chest before he hit the ground. The dog was frighteningly light. Rowan's breath left him in a hard sound that might have been a curse or a prayer. Rook pressed his muzzle weakly into the front of Rowan's shirt, and for a moment the whole storm narrowed to warmth struggling against cold. "I've got you," Rowan said, though his own voice shook. "I've got you, buddy. I've got you." Rook's tail moved once, not a wag. Just a reflex so small it hurt more than anything dramatic could have. Rowan lifted him with both arms and carried him back to the truck. Snow collected on his shoulders, in his hair, on the back of his gloves. Inside, he laid Rook carefully across the passenger seat, blasted the heat, and stripped off his own jacket to cover him. The dog's breathing was shallow and quick. His ribs showed with every rise. As Rowan pulled back onto the road, his pulse had begun to pound in a way combat had once taught him to control. But this was different. On the battlefield, fear came clean. You knew where it stood. This fear had roots. If Rook was here, in this condition, then what the hell had happened at home? Elise would never. No. The thought broke before it finished. He held tighter to the wheel. Maybe there had been an accident. Maybe she was gone. Maybe someone else had taken over the house while she was in the hospital. Maybe she had been hurt. Maybe all the things he had been too late to save in other places had finally followed him home. Rook gave a soft sound beside him, somewhere between a breath and a whine. Rowan glanced over. The dog's eyes were half open, fixed not on him but forward, toward the road, toward home. And that was when the cold in Rowan's chest changed shape. Because if Rook had been lost, truly lost, he would have been anywhere. But he was here. On the road leading back into White Pine Hollow, dragging himself through a storm in the right direction, as if he had been trying to return. Half a mile later, Rowan slowed again without realizing it. Rook, who barely had strength to lift his head, suddenly did. Not high, not dramatically, just enough for Rowan to see the line of the dog's muzzle, angled toward the windshield, toward the trees ahead, toward the route home. His ears twitched once beneath the wet fur. Then, with painful effort, Rook tried to push himself up from the seat. That movement lodged under Rowan's ribs like a splinter of ice. Not wandering, he thought. Not wandering at all. Someone had either driven this dog far from home, or Rook had crossed more frozen road than he ever should have survived. And if either of those was true, then whatever waited at the house was not grief alone. It was something uglier. The lane to the house came into view through the storm, like a memory refusing to hold still. The maple out front was there, its bare limbs loaded with fresh snow. The roofline was the same. The porch was the same shape he had pictured for months in clinics, ports, borrowed rooms, and nameless transit terminals. But everything human about it felt wrong at once. The porch light was a cold white, instead of the amber Elise used to prefer. A security camera blinked beneath the eave. Beside the garage stood a dark SUV polished enough to look insulting in weather like this. And when Rowan pulled close enough to see the front door clearly, the lock hardware caught the dimming light with the sharp metallic shine of something new. His stomach dropped. He shut off the engine but did not move for a moment. Snow hissed against the windshield. Beside him, Rook made a faint choking sound and tried to shift again. "Easy," Rowan murmured automatically, one hand going to the dog's neck. The fur there was rough beneath his palm. Too rough, too thin. He stepped out into the storm and went to the porch. Each bootfall felt unreal, like he was walking inside the wrong life. Before he could knock, the door opened. The man standing there was tall, maybe mid-40s, with the composed leanness of someone who took care of himself because he valued the impression of control. His coat was charcoal wool, long and expensive, a dark scarf tucked precisely at the throat. His face was narrow, elegant in a predatory way, with a straight nose and a mouth too disciplined to be kind. His hair was black threaded with silver at the temples, brushed neatly back. His eyes were dark and assessing. He looked like the sort of man who had learned long ago that politeness, used correctly, could wound as effectively as contempt. "Can I help you?" he asked. For a second Rowan only stared. The wind shoved snow between them. "I'm looking for my wife," Rowan said. His voice was low, controlled because he made it be. "Elise Hale." The man's gaze shifted once, quick as a blade. Toward the truck, he noticed the dog. Something unreadable moved in his expression and was gone. "You need to leave," he said. "Now is not a good time." Rowan's body went very still. "Who are you?" "Gideon Voss." That name meant nothing and everything all at once. A stranger standing in Rowan's doorway during a storm, speaking with the confidence of occupancy. "I said I'm looking for my wife." "And I said," Voss replied, still maddeningly calm, "that you should leave this property. Elise does not want a scene. If you continue this, I'll call the sheriff." Property, the word rang louder than it should have. Rowan looked past him into the house, just for a second, warm light. A rug he didn't recognize. Furniture shifted. The shape of his old life still there underneath, but altered, curated, overwritten. Then Elise appeared in the hallway behind Voss. She had changed less than he expected, and more than he could bear. Elise Hale was in her mid-30s, slender and fine-boned, the sort of woman whose beauty had never been loud. Her chestnut, brown hair fell neatly to her shoulders. Her skin was pale against the storm, lit doorway, and her face, on so open Rowan had thought he could always read it, was now tight with something like shock and dread. She wore a cream sweater and dark trousers, too composed for a reunion, too composed for grief. Her eyes found Rowan, then slid past him toward the truck. And when she saw Rook through the windshield, her expression changed, not to relief, to alarm. That was the moment Rowan understood, with the clean internal click of something locking into place, that whatever had happened here had not happened by accident. "Elise," he said. She swallowed. "Rowan." The years between them crowded the porch. Voss stepped slightly sideways, not enough to look aggressive, only enough to make ownership visible. "You need to go," he said again. "If you don't leave, this becomes trespassing and harassment." Rowan could have hit him. The thought came and went, bright and useless. He could have shoved his way inside. He could have shouted until the whole town heard. He could have demanded an explanation for every new thing in sight. Then Rook coughed in the truck. The sound was thin, raw, and final enough to cut through everything else. Rowan looked at Elise one more time, searching for anything. Fear for him, grief, shame, some sign of the woman who had once slept with one hand resting over Rook's flank, because she said the dog's breathing made the house feel safer. What he found instead was confusion, guilt, and a terrible practiced hesitation. Not tonight, he thought. Not like this. He stepped back from the porch. Voss said nothing. Snow blew between them like static. Rowan turned, walked to the truck, and climbed inside. Rook's eyes opened as if he had been waiting only for that. Rowan put one hand on the dog's side, felt the fragile heat there, and started the engine. He still didn't know what had happened to his marriage, or his house, or how long Rook had been fighting to get back. But as the truck backed out into the whitening dark, one truth stood cold and complete in the center of him. Something had tried to erase him from this place. It had failed with the dog, and that meant it might fail with him too. The motel on the edge of White Pine Hollow looked as though winter had been trying to wear it down for years and had only been kept from succeeding by habit. Its brick walls were the dull color of wet clay. Its sign buzzed with a tired yellow light, and the parking lot had drifted over so many times that the plow line seemed older than the place itself. Rowan parked close to the office door only because it would shorten the distance between the truck and whatever help remained in the world. When he opened the passenger door, Rook tried to lift his head again. "Don't," Rowan said softly, and the softness in his voice startled him. It had been a long time since anything living had made him speak that way. He slid one arm beneath the German shepherd's chest and the other under his hindquarters, taking the dog's weight with practiced care. Rook was still too light. The harness, black with a narrow edge of dark red, hung more loosely than it should have over his frame. A 6-year-old working line shepherd should have felt like grounded strength, dense and balanced, all contained momentum. Instead, Rook felt like something Winter had been chewing on and not yet finished with. Inside the office, an older clerk with nicotine yellowed fingers looked up from a television mounted in the corner. He had the drooping face and slow eyes of a man who had spent too many years watching weather reports, and not enough watching anything else. But when he saw the dog in Rowan's arms, his whole expression changed. "Lord," he muttered, already reaching for the keyboard. "You need Belle Veterinary. She still answers after hours when it's bad." "It's bad," Rowan said. The man nodded once, like someone who knew the difference between worry and emergency. 3 blocks east by the frozen creek, white building with green trim. Rowan did not ask for a room first. He did not think about cost identification, or what explanation he would give, if anyone demanded one. Those things belonged to the world of sequence. Right now there was only the next necessary thing. The clinic sat where the clerk said it would, half hidden behind a low drift and a dark stand of pines. Its hand-painted sign read Belle Veterinary Clinic. The letters curved around a small pine branch and paw print. The porch light glowed amber against the storm, warmer than anything Rowan had seen since entering town. He kicked snow from his boots, carried Rook inside, and was hit at once by the smell of disinfectant, wool, and animal heat. The waiting room was narrow, clean, and practical. A basket of old dog toys sat in one corner. The radiator clanked like something alive in the wall. A woman came through the back door before he could call out. Dr. Maribel was 42, medium height, broad through the shoulders in the way of people who had spent years lifting frightened animals and carrying the pieces of other people's carelessness. Her brown hair was tied back low, already loose at the temples from a long day. She had pale skin roughened by northern winters, gray-brown eyes, and a face that was not soft, but profoundly dependable. Her clinic coat was a muted blue, gray over a charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed up past her wrists. She took in Rowan, the dog, the storm on both of them, and wasted no time on surprise. "Exam room," she said, holding the door open. Rowan laid Rook on the padded table. The dog's eyes opened halfway, amber and cloudy with exhaustion, then fixed on Rowan's hand until Rowan left it there beside his shoulder. Mara worked quickly, and without drama. Temperature, heart, gums, hydration, legs, neck, lungs. Every time she found something new, the set of her mouth changed almost imperceptibly. "What happened?" she asked. "I found him on County Road 8, heading toward town," Rowan said. "That's all I know." "Not all," she said quietly, fingers moving over the ridge of Rook's neck. "You know he's been through this more than once." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Tell me." She stepped back only far enough to meet his eyes. "He's severely underweight. He's been exposed to cold repeatedly, not just tonight. There's an older injury in the rear leg, untreated. He has pressure marks here." She touched the neck again, not roughly. "Something held him too tight for too long. Chain, maybe, heavy tie out. And he's got the kind of fatigue I see in animals that push past what their bodies can support." The room seemed to narrow around Rowan. He had learned long ago how to keep his face still when truth arrived with teeth, but stillness was not the same thing as peace. His hand remained on the table near Rook. The dog stretched his muzzle just enough to lay it across Rowan's wrist. Mara noticed and softened only with her voice. "He knows you," Rowan swallowed once. "He found me first." "No," she said. "He made it as far as he could. There's a difference." She placed fluids, brought warm blankets, clipped away matted fur near the harness line, and moved with the kind of competence that made panic feel childish. Rowan stayed where he was unless she told him otherwise. When she needed him to steady the dog, he did. When she needed him to move, he moved. That old obedience returned easily when there was a mission attached to it. Save the living thing in front of you, ask questions later. It was almost midnight before Mara let him breathe. "He'll make it through the night if there's no internal complication I'm missing," she said. "But he's not going back out in this weather. Not tonight." Rowan looked down at Rook, now bundled in 2 clinic blankets beneath a heat lamp. The shepherd's breathing still rasped, but it had steadied. His ears twitched occasionally at sounds in the hallway. He had not closed his eyes fully once. "I'm not leaving him," Rowan said. "That wasn't a suggestion." Mara nodded toward a chair against the wall. "Sit. I'll get you coffee that tastes bad enough to count as medicine." She returned 5 minutes later with coffee in a chipped mug, and the look of someone who had decided she was now involved whether she wanted to be or not. "You're Rowan Hale," she said. He looked up. "You know me. I know of you. Small towns are museums of unfinished stories." She leaned one hip against the counter. "You were the husband who stopped coming home." The words were blunt, but not cruel. Rowan accepted them because he had no energy left for offense. "I didn't stop trying." Mara's eyes held his for a beat longer than politeness required. Something in them shifted then, not into pity, but into revised understanding. "That," she said, "sounds more true." Outside, the storm kept dragging itself over the windows. Inside, the heat made Rowan aware of the ache in his own body. He had not really slept in 2 days. His shoulder still held an old injury that flared in cold weather. His head carried the pressure of all the questions he had no room to ask. Mara sat opposite him and folded her hands. "People have been feeding him." The statement landed differently than he expected. Not relief. Not exactly. Something more painful than that. "Who?" "Bits and pieces from different places," she said. "Nothing organized. Enough to keep him upright, not enough to restore him." She studied his face carefully. "You didn't know he was still around the house." Rowan let out a breath that did not deserve to be called a laugh. "I didn't know anything. I came back tonight." Mara nodded slowly, as though fitting him into a puzzle she had been unwilling to complete alone. "Then there's a lot you should hear. Not tonight maybe, but soon." Rook had been barely conscious for an hour when it happened. A truck downshifted on the road outside, the sound low and heavy beneath the storm, and the dog came half upright in an instant of pure reflex. Not with strength. There was almost none of that. But with memory. His ears flattened, his body shook, his eyes went wide and fixed on the front door as if the sound had reached into some dark place inside him and pulled a wire tight. Rowan was beside him before he remembered standing. "It's all right," he said, one hand hovering first, then settling slowly against the dog's shoulder. "It's all right." Rook did not believe him immediately. That was the part that hollowed Rowan out. It was not fear of thunder, not fear of strangers. It was the look of a creature who had learned that engines in the dark could mean being taken somewhere against his will. Mara's face, watching from across the room, lost the last of its professional distance. When Rook finally lowered his head again, Rowan understood something without yet knowing the proof. Whatever had happened to his dog had not belonged to Weather alone. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Mara dozed for 20 minutes in a back office chair, and denied it when she woke. Rowan remained in the exam room, his boots planted on the linoleum, one hand resting on the edge of Rook's blanket, as if the dog might disappear if he broke contact too long. Near dawn, the storm weakened into a fine, bitter fall. The clinic windows turned from black to iron gray. Mara checked Rook again, adjusted the fluids, and then, perhaps because daylight makes some truths harder to avoid, told Rowan what she knew. "There's a woman down on Baker Street, Nora Pike. Bakery owner. Small, silver hair, talks like everyone is half hungry and half in trouble." Mara poured fresh coffee and handed him another mug. "She's mentioned your dog a few times, said he came by before sunrise now and then, took food if she stepped back." Rowan listened without moving. "And Mabel Reed, 2 houses west of your place widow, keeps birdseed in old coffee tins and talks to her porch steps when no one's around." A faint, tired smile crossed Mara's face. "She left out blankets once, said he used them for one night, and then went back to your house." "My house," Rowan said. But the words came out strange. Mara did not challenge them. "Harold Finch, too. He lives behind the pines on the next lot over. 70-something. Nervous man," said the dog kept returning to the front porch, no matter what. Something hard and low shifted inside Rowan then. Not anger fully formed. Not yet, but the architecture of it. Not wandering. Not gone. returning again and again, through cold, hunger, and whatever else had been done to him. "And no one called?" he asked. Mara looked at him with the unpleasant honesty of people who have buried enough animals to lose patience with performance. Maybe they should have. Maybe some thought someone else would. Maybe some were afraid of being wrong. Maybe some were afraid of being right. He wanted to reject that answer. He wanted to find somebody to blame cleanly. But war had taught him that communities fail more often through distributed cowardice than singular evil. Still, when he looked at Rook's neck, at the raw line where metal or rope had once rubbed through trust and fur alike, cowardice did not feel like a small sin. By mid-morning, the clinic bell rang, and a woman entered carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of yeast and cinnamon. "That'll be Nora," Mara said. Nora Pike was around 70, compact and round, shouldered in a burgundy cardigan under a long winter coat dusted with flour at one cuff, as if she had left her bakery in the middle of something half-finished. Her silver hair was pinned in a loose twist, and her face held the sort of softness time gives only to people who have spent years feeding others through sorrow. Her eyes, though, were sharp. They went straight to Rook. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, and then her gaze lifted to Rowan. "You're home. Not back. Not finally. Just home." The word struck him harder than any welcome could have. Nora set the paper bag down, clasped both hands together to stop them trembling, and looked between the man and the dog as if she had been waiting for one picture to complete the other. "He never stopped going to your door," she said. Rowan did not trust himself to answer. Nora continued in a softer voice. "Even when the snow got deep, sometimes he'd take the bread I left and carry part of it away. Wouldn't eat it all there, like he needed to bring something back with him." Rowan closed his eyes for 1 second. He saw the road again. The storm, Rook pushing himself through the snow toward town with a body already nearly spent. Not giving up, not turning feral, just trying, in whatever remained of him, to come back. When he opened his eyes, Rook was watching him, and Rowan understood that whatever had been taken from him while he was gone, house, marriage, certainty, time, this dog had spent months standing against it in the only way he knew how, by staying loyal to a place that had stopped being kind. That realization settled in him with a strange kind of peace beneath the rage. He did not yet know what had happened in detail. He did not know what Elise had told the town, what Voss had touched, or how far the damage reached. But he knew now that Rook had not vanished. Rook had waited, and that changed everything. Morning came late and colorless to White Pine Hollow. The storm had moved on in the night, but it had left the town under a hard white silence that felt almost more severe than wind. Snow sat thick on roofs, fences, and pine branches, smoothing the world into something clean, looking, and deceitful. The kind of mourning that made people believe damage could disappear if it was buried deeply enough. Rowan Hale stood outside the motel room window for a long moment before going back inside. The glass was filmed with a pale crust of frost at the corners, and beyond it the parking lot lay under tire ruts already softening beneath fresh powder. Somewhere down the road a plow scraped. The metal grind low and far away. He had slept perhaps 90 minutes in pieces, sitting in a chair beside Rook's borrowed bedding in the clinic, until Mara all but ordered him to take a room and lie flat for a few hours. The dog was stable now, still weak, still too thin, but alive. Alive was enough for one night. Now the daylight had brought back everything else. Rowan rubbed a hand over his face, and felt the faint burn of unshaven skin he had not yet bothered to deal with. In the mirror above the motel sink, he looked harder than he remembered. Not older, exactly. More weathered at the edges. The angles of his face had sharpened. The silver blue in his eyes looked colder after too little sleep. His dark brown hair, cut short in the old military way though grown slightly longer than regulation, was damp from a fast wash and already drying into order. Even tired, even half, creased from the motel chair. His body held the straightness of habit, shoulders squared, movements economical, as if he still expected the world to punish carelessness. He dressed in the same clothes because they were all he had needed for months. The old military gray tactical shirt settled over his frame like something honest. The dark red thermal showed at the collar. His worn combat pants still carried salt stains at one cuff. He laced his boots, checked the old military watch on his wrist, and stood still for a second, with both palms braced on the sink. He had spent years learning how to enter hostile spaces without bringing his emotions in ahead of him. That skill had saved his life in rooms full of guns. He was not sure it would save him from a house with his name still on it, and another man standing in the doorway. At the clinic, Maribel was in the exam room changing Rook's water when Rowan arrived. She looked as though she had been awake since before dawn. Hair tied back low again, clinic coat buttoned over a charcoal sweater, face scrubbed clean of softness by responsibility. Her gray-brown eyes flicked to Rowan, took in the set of his mouth, and understood something without asking. "You're going back there," she said. Rowan looked at Rook first. The German Shepherd lay on layered blankets beneath the heat lamp, head up this time, though only just. His amber eyes had cleared a little in the past hours. His body still looked wrong to Rowan. Too narrow through the ribs, too hollow above the hips, too careful in every motion. But the stillness in him no longer felt like dying. It felt like pain being endured. Rook's ears twitched when Rowan stepped closer. His tail moved once against the blanket. "Just to talk," Rowan said. Mara gave him a look that suggested she had spent enough years around men to know how often just to talk meant trouble. "If by talk you mean act like a human being and not an avalanche, I approve." He almost smiled, almost. "I mean, I need to hear Elise say something that sounds true." Mara capped the water bottle and folded her arms. "Truth's usually ugly by the time people are done hiding it." Rowan rested one hand gently against Rook's shoulder. The dog leaned, not heavily, but with trust enough to make Rowan's throat feel tight. "I'll be back," he murmured. Rook watched him go with that same unsettling steadiness that had followed him since the road. The drive to the house was shorter in daylight, and somehow worse. White Pine Hollow looked innocent under morning snow. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray threads. A pair of children in bright knit hats dragged a sled across a neighbor's yard. Someone had cleared the sidewalk in front of the bakery. Everything suggested ordinary life. That was the cruel thing about small towns. They could hold scandal, pity, silence, betrayal, and church, bell peace in the same square mile, and present only the peace to outsiders. By the time Rowan turned into the lane, his heartbeat had gone curiously quiet. The house stood exactly where memory had left it, but memory had become an unreliable witness. The porch rail had been repainted darker. One of the shutters was gone. The camera under the eave flashed a tiny red blink. The lock on the front door still looked new enough to offend him. He saw Elise through the side window before anyone opened the door. She crossed the entry hall carrying a mug in both hands. And even from a distance Rowan felt the old recognition hit him in the ribs before anything gentler could reach it. Elise Hale had once made stillness seem warm. That had been one of the first things he loved about her. She was in her mid-30s now, slim and fine, boned, with chestnut, brown hair that fell to her shoulders in smooth waves. She used to tuck behind one ear when she was anxious. Her face was pale in the winter light, elegant without sharpness. But the softness he remembered had drawn tight around the eyes and mouth. She still moved gracefully. That hurt too. Grace meant some part of her life had stayed intact. When she opened the door, she did not gasp or cry out or run into his arms. She stopped. That was worse. Rowan. His name came out of her like something she had rehearsed, never having to say again. The wind moved lightly between them. Snow fell from the porch roof in a small, powdery slide. "Elise," he said. For one fragile second, neither of them moved. Rowan could see what time had done to her and what it had not. The faint fatigue beneath her eyes, the stiffness in the hand around the mug, the way she stood half-turned, as if some part of her had already learned to leave rooms before conversations were over. Then Gideon Voss appeared behind her. In daylight, he looked even more carefully assembled. Tall, lean, immaculate. His charcoal coat fit him too well to be accidental. His dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, was brushed back from a narrow, handsome face built of restraint and calculation. He was clean, shaven, skin pale against the winter light. mouth composed in a way that suggested he rarely lost control and liked to make other people do it for him. He did not crowd Elise, but he placed himself near enough to imply alliance. "You shouldn't be here unannounced," Gideon said. Rowan kept his eyes on Elise. "I came home." Something moved across her face then. Pain, maybe, or shame, but it was gone before he could trust it. "You were gone a long time." "I know exactly how long I was gone." Gideon's tone stayed level. "This isn't productive." Rowan turned his head slowly and looked at him fully for the first time. Voss held his gaze. It was a controlled stare, practiced, not a challenge from a fool. Rowan knew the type. Men who had spent years using calm as a weapon. "Then maybe you should stop talking," Rowan said. Elise flinched before Gideon did. "I'm not here for a scene," Rowan added, and that part was true enough to keep his voice flat. "I'm here because I found my dog half dead in a storm, miles from where he should have been, and I came back to my house to find another man telling me to leave." Elise's fingers tightened around the mug. Rook shouldn't have been out there. The sentence hung in the air with its own accusation. "No," Rowan said, "he shouldn't." As he said it, Rowan's eyes caught on the wall behind Elise. The old wooden place where his shadow box had hung for years, his Navy insignia, unit patch, a folded commendation, the small framed photograph of him with Rook as a young dog. All of it was gone. In its place hung a winter landscape print, tasteful and empty, the kind sold in mountain gift shops to people who liked beauty, only when it had no memory attached. The sight hit Rowan harder than the changed lock had. Somebody had not just made room in the house. Somebody had curated his absence. And in that instant, before anyone said another word, he understood with perfect cold clarity that what had happened here was not confusion alone. It was arrangement. His voice, when it returned, had gone quieter. "What did you do with the rest of my things?" Elise looked away. "First. Packed, stored, some of them." "Some of them." Rowan repeated. Gideon answered for her. "You disappeared, Rowan. People had to make decisions." Something in Rowan's chest wanted badly to become violence. Not because Gideon insulted him, men had insulted him before. Not because Elise had let him stand there like a debt collector at his own door, but because another man had used the language of necessity to explain away the slow erasure of a life Rowan had believed was still his. He held himself still by force. "When did you change the locks?" he asked. Elise swallowed. "After the break. In scare." "What break?" "In," she hesitated. "Just enough." Gideon stepped in. There were concerns. A woman alone out here, winter coming on, the dog unpredictable. Rook was never unpredictable, Rowan said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Elise's eyes flickered toward the truckless drive behind him, as if she could still somehow see the dog through distance and memory. "He changed after you were gone." "Did he?" Rowan said. "Or did you?" Color rose faintly into her face. For the first time, anger broke through the carefulness. "Do not come here after all this time and act like you know what it was like." There it was. Not warmth, not reunion, but life. A crack in the dead composure. "Then tell me," Rowan said. "Tell me what it was like." And for one heartbeat she seemed about to. He saw it happen. The almost confession, the almost collapse, the almost human instinct to stop carrying the lie because the man she had lied about was suddenly flesh and winter and breathing in front of her. Then Gideon laid 2 fingers lightly against the back of her elbow. The gesture was gentle, possessive, efficient. Elise shut down again. "That's enough," Gideon said. "This is not the place." Rowan's gaze dropped to Gideon's hand and then lifted back to his face. He would remember that small touch longer than any shouted insult. People revealed themselves in the pressure they thought others wouldn't notice. He stepped forward 1 pace onto the porch. Gideon stiffened slightly. Rowan did not crowd him. He did not threaten. He only stood close enough now that Gideon could see something in his eyes. No polished man ever wanted to see directed at himself, measured contempt from somebody not impressed by money, manners, or posture. You talk a lot for a man standing in another man's doorway, Rowan said. Elise whispered, Please don't. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw what weakness had done. It had not made her monstrous. It had made her small in the worst ways, small enough to let another person do her hard thinking. Small enough to call survival the same thing as surrender. Small enough to watch a loyal dog keep returning, and still not open the door. The realization hollowed him out more than rage. He had spent months imagining 100 disasters, hospital beds, funerals, debt, grief, betrayal of the body. He had not imagined this thinner ruin, a woman he once loved becoming somebody who could survive by closing her eyes one compromise at a time. Where was he sleeping? Rowan asked. Elise blinked. What? Rook. His voice sharpened by almost nothing. If he wasn't in the house, where was he sleeping? She had no answer ready. That told him more than words. Gideon said, You need to leave. Rowan nodded once, as if agreeing to something else entirely. All right, he said. That startled both of them. He took a slow breath, let the cold clean his thinking, and began to understand the shape of what he could not afford to do. He could not force his way in. He could not strike Gideon. He could not stand here begging for truth from people already invested in denying it. Every instinct built in harsher places told him the same thing. If the ground beneath you is trapped, stop charging and start mapping. He looked at Elise one last time. I'm not asking for your pity, he said. I'm asking for facts. You can decide when you're ready to tell them. He turned and stepped off the porch. Behind him the door did not close immediately. He could feel them both standing there, one guilty and one calculating, watching his back the way people do when they cannot decide whether the danger is gone, or simply changing direction. At the end of the walk he paused, glancing toward the side yard, the line of the back fence, the old shed roof barely visible over the drift. The property looked ordinary in daylight. That meant nothing. Ordinary places hid rot best. Then he got back in his truck and drove away. He did not feel defeated. Defeat was cleaner. What he felt instead was the first hard formation of strategy. Something had happened inside that house over many months, not one act, a sequence, a series of choices, justifications, papers signed, belongings moved, locks changed, silences maintained, and somewhere inside that sequence was the answer to why Rook had been left to shiver at the edge of a life he used to belong to. Rowan drove straight back to the clinic. When he stepped into the exam room, Rook lifted his head from the blanket and watched him with exhausted, unwavering eyes. Rowan knelt beside him, resting a hand against the dog's neck with care around the rawness there. I know, he said quietly, not entirely sure which of them he was speaking to. I know enough to start. Rook's muzzle pressed once against his wrist. Outside, the snow kept falling, patient and silent, over White Pine Hollow, covering rooftops, roads, porches, tracks. But Rowan had spent too long in places where men believed weather could bury truth. He knew better than that. By late afternoon, White Pine Hollow had settled into the kind of winter quiet that made every sound seem chosen. Snow no longer fell in heavy curtains. It drifted now in patient, almost thoughtful flakes, gathering along fence rails, sagging pine boughs, and the roofs of little houses that looked too small to hold as much sorrow as people carried inside them. Rowan drove slowly through town with the heater low and the windshield cracked just enough to keep the glass from fogging. He had left Rook sleeping beneath Maribel's heat lamp, wrapped in clinic blankets, with strict instructions from her not to drag that dog into the next war, just because you found one. He had obeyed because she was right. It did not make him feel better. He parked first near the bakery. Nora Pike's shop sat between a feed store and a shuttered barber pole, its front windows fogged from the oven heat inside. A painted sign hung above the door, the letters curving softly as if the town itself had written them years ago and never seen reason to change. When Rowan stepped in, warmth met him with such immediate force that for a second he simply stood there taking it. The smell of yeast, cinnamon, butter, and coffee wrapped around him, like something almost indecent after so much cold. It was the kind of smell that belonged to homes where people still said grace before cutting bread. Nora looked up from behind the counter. In daylight, she seemed even smaller than she had in the clinic, though nothing about her invited the word fragile. She was around 70, round-faced and silver-haired, with a compact body built by years of early mornings and standing on unforgiving floors. Her burgundy cardigan hung open over a cream apron dusted with flour, and her hands, broad, knuckled, reddened by heat and winter both, rested against the counter, as though she needed the wood to steady herself before speaking. "I thought you'd come," she said. Rowan removed his gloves and approached. "You said he used to come here." Nora's eyes softened, but guilt moved through them first. "Not every day. Some weeks more than others. Before sunrise usually, when the roads were still blue, dark, and the town hadn't put its face on yet." She poured him coffee without asking if he wanted any. Rowan took the mug because refusing would have felt like stepping around something sacred. "Did he ever seem lost?" he asked. Nora shook her head almost immediately. "No, hungry. Yes, tired. Yes, cautious, but not lost." She drew in a slow breath. Lost animals wander differently. They stop, they circle, they look for help in any direction. Rook always came with purpose, like he had somewhere else to be when he left me. "Home," Rowan said. Her chin trembled once. "Yes." He stared into the coffee for a moment. The black surface shook slightly from the heat in his hand. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" The question sounded foolish as soon as it left him. He had not been reachable. That was the cruel arithmetic of it. Still, Payne often asked questions logic could not answer. Nora understood anyway. "Tell you where?" she asked softly. "We didn't know if you were dead, Rowan," Elise said. "Nobody knew anything. Then Gideon started appearing everywhere. Some people figured if you were gone and she had moved on, it was none of their business. And you?" She did not answer at once. Instead, she glanced toward the back room where pans cooled on racks and some unseen timer ticked. "I thought kindness was enough," she said at last. "A scrap of sausage, warm water. A blanket, if he let me get close." Her mouth tightened. It wasn't. Rowan wanted to tell her she had done more than most. The words would not come. Not because they were untrue, but because he could not yet forgive the town for mistaking mercy in pieces for responsibility. Nora reached beneath the counter and pulled out an old pastry tin, setting it in front of him. Inside lay 3 dog biscuits wrapped in waxed paper and a faded red ribbon from some long finished holiday box. "I kept these because he wouldn't always take them," she said. "The good biscuits. Sometimes he'd sniff, look toward your road, and leave without eating." That detail hurt in a place Rowan had no language for. He pictured Rook pausing at the bakery door, weighing food against loyalty and choosing movement. "Was he afraid of anything?" Rowan asked. Nora looked up sharply. "Engines." The word hung there. "Big vehicles mostly," she said. "Not all cars. Not at first. But the last few times, if a truck slowed too close, or something heavy came down the road, he'd go stiff." She pressed one palm flat to the counter, remembering. "Not mean, never mean, just braced." Rowan said nothing. He didn't need to. His mind had already begun its own dark filing. When he left the bakery, the cold struck him harder. Nora's warmth had been dangerous that way. It made winter feel personal when it returned. He drove next to Mabel Reed's place. Her house was narrow and pale blue beneath the snow, with a porch too wide for one woman and a little iron bird feeder shaped like a church lantern hanging near the steps. Mabel answered after the second knock, pulling the door open with one hand while keeping the other tucked into the sleeve of her cardigan for warmth. She was perhaps 62, slight and fine. Boned, her gray hair cut short around a face made gentle by grief rather than age. Her eyes were a pale winter blue, the kind that always seemed on the verge of apologizing for things that were not entirely her fault. "I know who you are," she said before Rowan could speak. "You look like your wedding picture, just colder." The truth of that almost made him laugh. Mabel invited him in, though she kept glancing toward the road as if guilt might arrive visibly. Her living room smelled of tea and cedar. A crocheted blanket lay folded over the back of a chair, and there were framed photographs on every surface: husband, children, maybe grandchildren, all arranged with the fierce order of someone holding back loneliness by managing objects. She told him about the thump at her porch one night, In January. I thought it was raccoons in the bin again, she said, fingers working at the hem of her sleeve. But when I opened the door, he was there under the stormlight, standing, but barely. I brought out a storage crate, lined it with 2 old quilts, put it under the side overhang, where the wind couldn't hit directly. Her eyes lowered. He used it once, one night. By morning, he was gone. Back to my house, she nodded. Did you ever see who might have taken him away? Mabel hesitated too long. That was answer enough to sharpen Rowan's attention. Mrs. Reed, he said quietly. If you know something, I need it. She flinched at the formality. Mabel, please. All right, Mabel. Her face gathered itself into courage the way old cloth gathers into a knot, slowly, with strain already in it. I didn't see Gideon take the dog, she said. Not exactly. But the day before the storm, just near dusk, I saw Gideon's SUV backed up near your side yard. Driver's side open. I thought maybe they were unloading something, she swallowed. Then I heard barking once, sharp, cut off quick. Rowan stood very still. I told myself it could have been anything, she said, that maybe he was taking the dog somewhere safe because the weather was turning bad. Did it look safe? Rowan asked. Mabel's eyes filled. No. When Rowan stepped back outside, twilight had deepened to a blue, so cold it felt almost holy. He paused near the porch rail, looking across the road toward the distant line of trees. In the snow below Mabel's side steps, half drifted over but still visible where the wind had scoured the surface clean, were old tire impressions. Wide tracks, deep and clean. Edged, not from today, not from the county plow, too broad for most farm trucks around town. He crouched and studied them, breath fogging around his face. The shape meant nothing by itself. But suddenly every piece he'd heard that day shifted and clicked into a new shape inside him. Rook hadn't simply suffered near the house. At some point, somebody had moved him, and whoever had done it had been careful enough to count on weather, finishing the lie. By the time Rowan reached Harold Finch's place, the first porch lights were coming on along the street. Harold opened the door wearing an old flannel shirt buttoned wrong beneath a wool vest, as if his hands had stopped trusting themselves before the rest of him had realized it. He was 73 or thereabout, narrow in the shoulders, but thick through the middle, with thinning white hair, a nicotine mustache, and a face weathered by equal parts cold and self-reproach. He smelled faintly of menthol and old newspapers. I know why you're here, he said. Then save us both some time. Harold led him into a kitchen where a half-finished crossword sat beside a bowl of canned soup gone skin. Cold. The old man did not sit. He paced once, twice, then braced both hands on the table. I heard the dog howling at night, he said. More than once, sometimes from your back lot, sometimes closer to the porch. His throat moved. I called over there one time. Elise told me he was difficult after you disappeared, said Gideon was helping her manage things. Rowan kept his face still. Did you believe her? Harold let out a bitter sound. No, but I believed not getting mixed up in it would keep my life simpler. He looked up then, and the shame in his eyes was old enough to be real. That's a poor religion, son. This time Rowan sat because standing over an old man already bowed by his own memory felt too easy. Did you see anything? Harold nodded once. A week maybe before the big storm. I saw Gideon dragging Chain out by your shed. Couple days later, no dog. Then the storm hit. I told myself maybe he'd found somewhere better. He gave Rowan a miserable smile that died instantly. Turns out hope and cowardice use a lot of the same words. When Rowan left Harold's house, full night had come. He sat in his truck for a long minute, with the engine off, and the windows slowly frosting at the edges. White Pine Hollow glittered under snow and porch lamps like some Christmas Village people bought to reassure themselves about human nature. Underneath that prettiness lay a town of kind people who had fed his dog and failed him both. Rowan could not decide yet whether that made him angrier or sadder. He drove to the sheriff's substation only because thinking without action had started to feel like standing still in deep water. Deputy Cole Brannigan was the only one there. Cole looked younger up close than Rowan had expected from the name Mara had given him. Maybe 29. Tall, broad enough to fill the winter deputy jacket, but not yet thickened by age or too many bad meals on the job. He had light brown hair cut short, clean skin reddened by the cold, and clear hazel brown eyes that tried hard to project certainty and did not entirely manage it. There was no beard on him, only the raw sincerity of a face that had not yet learned how to hide every thought before it reached the mouth. He listened without interrupting while Rowan described where he had found Rook, what Mara had observed, and what Nora, Mabel, and Harold had said. Cole's jaw tightened more than once, but when Rowan finished, the young deputy folded his hands carefully on the desk. "I can make a note," Cole said. "I can speak to people, but right now what you've got is concern, not a charge." Rowan had expected that. He hated it anyway. "Then tell me what becomes a charge." Cole held his gaze. "Records, dates, statements signed, anything from the vet in writing, anything showing the dog was confined or deliberately abandoned." He hesitated. "And if there's a property angle, you need a lawyer before you need a badge." That answer, annoying as it was, had honesty in it. "Clara Whitmore," Rowan said. The deputy gave a short nod. "She's good. Do you trust her?" Cole's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I trust that she's expensive enough to scare dishonest people, and mean enough to enjoy it." It was the closest thing to humor Rowan had encountered all day. When he finally returned to the clinic, the windows glowed golden against the dark. Inside, Rook was awake. The dog lay where Rowan had left him, but his head lifted before the door had fully closed, as though some part of him had never really stopped keeping watch. Rowan crossed the room and knelt beside the blankets. Slowly, with the care one uses around wounds that are partly visible and partly not, he took the shepherd's face between both hands. "You were trying to come home," he said quietly. Rook's amber gaze did not waver, and they knew it. The dog blinked once and laid his muzzle against Rowan's palm. It was not proof, not legally, not in any courtroom that mattered. But to Rowan, kneeling there in the clinic warmth with winter pressing at the windows, it felt like the first thing in White Pine Hollow that had not lied to him. The next morning broke with a strange brightness over White Pine Hollow, the kind that came only after a hard storm had spent itself and left the world pretending innocence. Sunlight struck the snow in sheets of white fire. The pines behind Maribel's clinic stood motionless beneath their burden, dark trunks rising out of drifts so clean they looked untouched by any human mistake. Rowan Hale had never trusted mornings like that. In places where men lied for a living, beauty often arrived just after the damage, wearing the face of absolution. Inside the clinic, the heat smelled faintly of antiseptic, wool, wet fur, and the bitter coffee Mara kept forgetting to finish. Rook was awake before Rowan reached the exam room door. The German shepherd had not recovered enough to rise quickly, but there was more awareness in him now, more presence. His amber eyes followed Rowan across the room with the grave patience of an old soldier watching another soldier move. The dog still looked too thin. The black along his ears and back made the cream, gray of his undercoat seem even paler, as if winter had leached color from him. Yet something in his face had sharpened since the first night. Pain no longer blurred him completely. "Morning," Rowan said quietly. Rook's tail touched the blanket once. Mara, standing at the counter with a clipboard and a pen tucked behind one ear, glanced up. "He kept down boiled chicken this morning. Small amount, no vomiting, less tremor in the leg." She spoke in the dry, measured tone of someone who respected hope only when it arrived with evidence. "Don't look grateful yet. He's still weak, but he's fighting properly now." Rowan nodded. "Can I feed him?" "Half at a time," she said. "And if you start treating him like a prince who can do no wrong, I'll throw both of you out." There were days, Rowan thought, when kindness only looked believable if it wore a hard face. He crouched beside the blankets while Mara handed him the dish. Rook lifted his head with effort. Rowan held the bowl low and steady. The shepherd ate slowly, carefully, as if food still required negotiation with the body. Every few bites he paused and looked at Rowan, not pleading, not fearful, simply checking. Rowan had not realized until that moment how much of his own nervous system had become tuned to the dog's breathing. The dog's swallowing. The dog's ability to remain in the world 1 minute longer. Halfway through, Rook stopped. He licked once at the edge of the bowl, then lifted his muzzle and looked toward the door. Rowan waited, thinking perhaps the dog was tired, but Rook did not settle. He looked back at the bowl, then at Rowan, then at the door again with a focus that was not random at all. Mara saw it too. "What is that?" Rowan remembered Nora's voice in the bakery, rough with regret. Sometimes he'd take food and carry it away. He lowered the bowl slightly. Rook leaned forward, took a strip of chicken in his mouth, and carefully, painfully, pushed himself to his feet. Rowan went still. The dog stood there for one swaying second, one rear leg stiff with remembered injury, harness hanging looser than it should have over his once powerful frame. Then he began to walk. "Don't stop him yet," Rowan said under his breath, though Mara had not moved. Rook crossed the exam room with slow determination, the strip of chicken still held delicately between his teeth. He did not head for the back room, the water, or the blankets. He went to the outer door. Something in Rowan's chest tightened. Mara opened her mouth, then seemed to think better of whatever caution she had intended. "If he collapses, you carry him." "I know." The air outside was bright enough to hurt the eyes, snow-crusted at the edges where the sun had begun to bite into it, and the world made small sounds of thaw under the stillness. Drips from the eaves, a far-off plow blade, the faint settling sigh of heavy branches. Rook did not wander. He did not sniff at random or circle in confusion. He crossed the lot, reached the truck, paused only until Rowan opened the passenger door, and climbed in with stubborn, deliberate care. Mara stepped out onto the porch in her clinic coat, arms folded tightly against the cold. "If he's taking you somewhere, I want him back alive." Rowan looked at her over the truck roof. "I'll bring him back." Her eyes narrowed. "That isn't what I'm worried about." He almost smiled. Almost. The drive was short enough to be unbearable. Rook sat upright only because Will was holding his body together. He kept the strip of chicken in his mouth the entire way, as if it were not food but purpose. Rowan drove through town and onto the lane toward the Hale property with a rising certainty he could not yet name. Not superstition. Not fate. Something simpler and sadder. Habit need. Memory in the muscles. When he parked down the road from the house, Rook was already struggling toward the door. Rowan got out fast, came around, and steadied him with a hand beneath the chest harness. "Easy." Rook ignored the word and kept moving. They did not go to the front porch. That, more than anything, made Rowan's pulse change. The dog veered instead toward the side of the property, along the half-buried path where old stepping stones disappeared under fresh snow. Past the side yard, past the angle from which the kitchen window could be seen. Toward the back, the house looked quiet. Too quiet. No car in the drive now, but Elise's no movement at the windows. Yet Rowan moved with the same care he would have used in a place under surveillance. Old instincts never asked permission to return. He kept one eye on the house, one on Rook. The shed stood beyond the back fence line, half-screened by snow, loaded cedar and a bent lattice panel. Rowan remembered meaning to replace years ago. Its roof sagged slightly at one corner. The door had once been painted green. Now the color showed only in thin surviving streaks beneath weather and neglect. Rook stopped there, not dramatically, not with revelation. He simply let the strip of chicken fall from his mouth at the threshold and looked at the door. For one moment, Rowan could not move. Then he stepped forward and pulled the door open. The smell hit first: cold wood, damp fabric, old rust, stale dog, dust and oil, and the faint sourness of long-kept secrecy. Sunlight pushed through the crack in the boards and laid thin bars across the floor. Nothing in the shed had been arranged for discovery. That made it worse. A place meant to be forgotten often told the truth more honestly than any carefully hidden room. Against the far wall sat an old plastic water bowl, cracked along one edge. Near it was a stained blanket folded over itself, not by human hands, but by repeated turning and lying down. The floorboards near the door were scratched low and deep. Beside a support post, set into the wood, was a steel eye bolt. A length of chain no longer hung there, but rust marked the metal and the surrounding floor bore the half-circle scoring of movement measured in the same cruel radius over and over. Rowan felt something drop through him with terrifying quiet. Rook stepped inside one pace, lowered his head to the blanket, then looked back. Not magic, not guidance from another world. Only a wounded animal returning to the edge of the life from which he had been barred. Rowan crouched and touched the blanket. The fabric was stiff, with old damp and shed fur. Cream gray hairs clung to the rough weave. Behind him, snow fell from a branch in a soft collapse. He had to force himself to breathe evenly. Rage wanted to arrive all at once, hot and stupid, a simple thing that could be spent in one blow. But this was not a blow-shaped problem. This was a chain, a room, a dog left outside the house he had guarded. This was duration, repetition, choice. Then Rowan saw the envelope. It was wedged behind a dented metal toolbox beneath the workbench, the corner visible only because the cardboard had bowed. He would not have noticed it if he had not shifted to stand. The paper was official cream, one side stained by meltwater that had dried in a yellow fan. He pulled it free carefully. The name on the front stopped him cold. Rowan Hale, his own name, written in block print beneath the logo of North County Community Bank. The envelope had been opened already. Inside was a folded notice stamped in red, second request, tax escrow review/property access easement discussion. The legal wording moved in stiff little knives over the page. There were references to parcel access near the lake, preliminary survey contact, and financial review tied to late response. Rowan read it twice. Then a third time. He understood enough to know what he did not yet understand. This was not a mortgage foreclosure notice. It was not a bill. It was the sort of paperwork that existed in the gray territory where banks, land, roads, and developers began circling one another politely before somebody lost something permanent. Rook had settled beside the blanket now, chest rising hard but slower than before. He watched Rowan without complaint, as though waiting for him to catch up. A car door slammed somewhere in the front drive. Rowan froze. He stepped soundlessly to the edge of the shed door, and looked through the gap between cedar branches. Elise had returned. She stood by her car with a grocery bag in one arm, staring toward the back of the property, as if she felt something shift in the air. Even from this distance, Rowan could read the tension in the set of her shoulders. Her face was pale beneath the winter light. Chestnut hair pinned back loosely at the nape. One strand blown free across her cheek. For one irrational second, he thought she had come looking for Rook. Then she turned toward the house, without once glancing at the shed. The possibility died where it stood. Rook, who had barely been able to stand an hour ago, rose again. Not to greet her. Not to go forward. He stepped once toward Rowan, then placed his body, thin as it was, between Rowan and the open line of sight from the house, as if even now some old protective reflex was still alive in him. That small movement landed in Rowan harder than any dramatic act could have. The dog was exhausted, underfed, scarred, and still choosing guard duty. For a moment, Rowan could not tell whether the pressure behind his ribs was fury or grief, or some holy alloy of both. He waited until Elise had gone inside before he moved again. The envelope went into the inner pocket of his jacket. He took photographs with his phone. The eye, bolt, the floor marks, the bowl, the blanket, the shed door. Not because photographs could capture what the place felt like, but because feeling alone would never carry him through what came next. On the drive back to town, Rook slept for the first time in Rowan's presence with something close to surrender. His head rested against the seat. His ears twitched once or twice at bumps in the road, but he did not wake fully. Rowan drove one-handed, the other resting on the steering wheel hard enough to make the old watch dig into his wrist. He did not go straight to the clinic. He drove instead to the office above the old hardware store, where Clara Whitmore kept her practice. Her door was plain, painted a dark winter blue. The brass plaque beside it read Whitmore Land and Estate Law. Rowan climbed the narrow stairs and entered a reception room lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves, heavy with county codes, survey maps, and probate manuals. The room smelled faintly of paper, lemon oil, and radiator steam. Clara Whitmore rose from behind a desk as though she had expected him before the bell had finished ringing. She was in her early 60s, tall in a spare, disciplined way, silver hair cut to a clean jaw, length line, thin, rimmed glasses low on a face made sharp by intelligence rather than severity. Her skin was pale, her mouth unsmiling but not unkind, and her eyes, dark, steady, exact, had the unnerving quality of seeing not just what people said, but the legal shape of what they were trying not to say. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I hear your return has been eventful." Rowan removed the envelope from his jacket and laid it on her desk. Her gaze flicked to the bank stamp, then to his face. "This," he said, "was hidden in the shed where my dog has apparently been living." Clara did not widen her eyes. She only sat down, unfolded the paper, and began to read. The room stayed very quiet. When she finished, she placed both hands flat on the desk and looked up. "Well," she said, voice cool as cut glass, "that is not nothing." Rowan stood there in his old gray tactical shirt, snowmelt drying at the hem of his boots, and felt the story shift beneath his feet. What had happened to Rook was cruelty. What had happened to the house might be design. And for the first time since the road, Rowan sensed the outline of the larger machine that had tried to throw both of them away. The courthouse in Ironwood Falls stood 30 miles south of White Pine Hollow, built from pale limestone and old civic certainty, as if the men who first raised it had believed law could hold back winter if they stacked enough stone against the sky. On the morning of the hearing, the sky was a cold, polished blue, and the snow along the courthouse steps had been shoveled into neat white ridges that looked almost ceremonial. Rowan Hale parked beneath a stand of leafless maples and sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, watching the flag above the entrance snap hard in the wind. He had spent years entering buildings where the danger announced itself plainly. Checkpoints, safe houses, cargo docks in cities whose names blurred together after enough time. This building unsettled him in a different way. It was clean. It was public. It asked him to stand still and trust that truth, if arranged properly, might matter. Beside him, Rook lay on a folded wool blanket stretched across the back seat. The German Shepherd had gained a little steadiness over the last several days, enough that Maribel had allowed him to travel under one condition: no strain, no stares, no foolishness from either dog or man. His coat had been brushed as much as his body would tolerate, and though he was still too lean, the fur no longer clung to his frame in sad clumps. The black over his back and ears had regained a low sheen. The cream, gray around his chest and legs, still looked weathered, but not defeated. The loose black harness with its narrow dark red trim sat better on him now than it had the day Rowan found him in the snow. Though it still hung as proof of what hunger had taken. Rook lifted his head when Rowan opened the door. "I know," Rowan said quietly. "Me too." The dog's amber eyes stayed on him, steady and unreadable in the way that had always made Rowan feel as though the animal knew exactly how much of a man's soul was noise, and how much was true. They went inside by the side entrance Clara Whitmore had arranged. She met them in the hallway outside the small civil courtroom. Her long gray coat buttoned to the throat, silver hair cut cleanly at the jaw, thin rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light. Clara was one of those people whose age had sharpened rather than softened her. Her face was all economy. High cheekbones, narrow mouth, dark eyes that wasted nothing on panic. Even her stillness looked billable. "You look tired," she said. "So do you," Rowan answered. "Good. We match the gravity of the day." That was as close to affection as Clara ever seemed willing to come, and Rowan found he preferred it that way. The law in her hands felt less like a performance, and more like a blade kept clean. She crouched, not elegantly, but decisively, beside Rook. "You behave better than you're human," she told the dog. Rook blinked once. "Encouraging," Clara said, rising. Inside the courtroom, the heat ran slightly too high. People had begun to gather already, townsfolk from White Pine Hollow who had come because small towns are drawn to conflict the way cold hands are drawn to stoves, county staff with legal pads, a pair of men Rowan did not know who wore the posture of developers or bankers, all smooth coats and expensive hesitation. At the far front sat Gideon Voss beside his attorney, A narrow man with slicked back dark hair, and a face so carefully neutral, it looked trained into place. Elise sat one chair away from them, not touching either man. She wore a winter cream sweater under a pale camel coat, and looked beautiful in a way Rowan now understood had always contained fragility. Her chestnut hair was pinned back today, exposing the fine line of her throat. She had lost weight. Her face was tired, the skin beneath her eyes faintly shadowed, but she had chosen her composure carefully. Seeing her there made something inside Rowan ache with an old, exhausted intelligence. Grief changed form after enough betrayals. Eventually, it stopped crying and simply sat down beside you, waiting to see what else would be taken. Gideon Voss, by contrast, looked as if he had dressed specifically for the optics of innocence. Charcoal suit, white shirt, dark tie, polished shoes that reflected the courtroom lights. He was in his late 40s, tall and spare, with that same careful handsomeness Rowan had first seen framed in his own doorway. The silver at Gideon's temples made him look distinguished rather than aging. His face remained calm, almost courteously attentive, yet every inch of him gave off the impression of a man who believed rooms belonged to him if he waited long enough. He glanced once at Rook, only once. That was enough. Clara placed her case file on the table and began laying things out in exact order. Veterinary reports from Mara, notarized statements from Nora Pike and Mabel Reed. The written affidavit Harold Finch had finally signed with a shaking hand, printed stills from Eli Mercer's unsteady phone footage, county property records, Rowan's original limited power of attorney, the bank envelope recovered from the shed, the easement correspondence, certified mail logs Clara had fought to obtain, and a binder tabbed with so many colored markers, it looked almost festive in a cruel way. Judge Evelyn Mercer entered without spectacle. She was a woman in her 60s, compact, dark-skinned, silver-haired, with a face that suggested she had spent decades listening to people confuse emotion with evidence, and had no intention of indulging them any longer. Her black robe did not make her imposing. Her attention did. The hearing began not with drama, but with paper. Clara's voice was clear, low, and relentless. She did not accuse in thunderous terms, she built. She walked the court through the original power of attorney Rowan had signed before leaving. Limited in scope, narrow in language, practical, taxes, utilities, insurance, necessary repairs. Nothing more. Then she placed beside it the chain of later actions, correspondence rerouted, land, access discussions initiated, tax escrow notices hidden, property questions raised without Rowan's direct knowledge, and the first visible movements toward an easement arrangement that would have benefited the Lake Development Group Gideon advised. Mr. Hale's disappearance created uncertainty, Gideon's attorney argued smoothly. Mrs. Hale acted under distress and in good faith to protect the property. Clara turned one page. Then why were his certified notices redirected? Why did this correspondence end up in an outbuilding where the dog had evidently been confined, rather than in the primary residence where the authorized party lived? The attorney opened his mouth, shut it, then recovered. Maribel testified next. She wore the same faded blue-gray clinic coat over a charcoal sweater, her hair tied low, her expression stripped down to professional seriousness. She described Rook's condition without dramatics: chronic undernourishment, repeated cold exposure, an untreated hind leg injury, pressure injuries consistent with prolonged tethering, and an acute exhaustion event near the time Rowan found him. When questioned, she was careful where care was needed, and merciless where certainty existed. Could this dog have simply wandered off for months? Gideon's attorney asked. Mara looked at him as one might look at a man who had confused confidence with knowledge. This dog did not present as feral, aimless, or broadly disoriented. He presented as a dog who had remained attached to a habitual location and experienced repeated deprivation near that location. The attorney tried again. And the condition in which he was found? Mara folded her hands, consistent with an already weakened animal being pushed beyond safe range in severe weather. The room changed slightly after that. Rowan felt it. Not sympathy exactly. More like the first crack in a surface people had been pretending was stone. Then Eli Mercer was called. He looked even younger in court than he had on the street. A thin boy of 14 with 2 long brown hair, trying to flatten itself under a knit cap he kept twisting in both hands. His jacket was navy and too light for the season, his boots muddy at the seams, his face still carrying the last softness of childhood, except around the eyes, where worry had made a premature home. But when he sat in the witness chair and raised his hand to swear to tell the truth, something stubborn settled over him. Clara asked only a few questions. What route did he ride for newspapers? How often did he pass the Hale property? Had he ever recorded anything there? Eli swallowed. Yes, ma'am. The video he'd taken months earlier was short, shaky, and far from cinematic. But in the courtroom silence, its roughness made it feel truer. Snow on the porch steps. Gideon moving sharply in the frame. Rook near the base of the stairs, thinner already trying to come up. A shouted word blurred by wind. Then the visible swing of Gideon's leg. Not a theatrical kick. Not the kind movies use to force outrage. Just a hard, contemptuous strike meant to drive the dog back. The angle caught Elise in the doorway behind him, one hand at her chest, not intervening. The clip ended in static, and Elise frightened breathing. For one suspended second, nobody in the courtroom moved. Rowan did not look at Gideon first. He looked at Elise. She had gone pale in a way makeup could not conceal. Her eyes were fixed on the dead screen as if she had not known until this moment that memory could return wearing pixels. That stillness held the room more completely than outrage would have. The hearing went on. Mabel Reed testified in the hesitant voice of a woman unused to public speaking but unable, finally, to live with private silence. She described the crate of blankets she had left under her porch, the single night Rook used it, and the way he had vanished by dawn only to reappear again near the Hale house days later. Harold Finch, red-eyed and ashamed, admitted hearing the dog cry outside in weather. No animal should have been left in, and seeing Gideon near the shed with chain in hand. Nora Pike spoke more softly than the others, but landed harder. Rook's repeated returns, the food he would sometimes carry away instead of eating, the look of a dog who did not want comfort so much as access. When Gideon finally took the stand under limited questioning, he remained infuriatingly composed. He denied cruelty, denied abandonment, claimed he had only tried to manage an increasingly difficult animal while supporting Elise through a painful, uncertain period. He admitted to changing the locks for safety. He framed every action as provisional, every assumption as reasonable. Rowan had known men like him overseas, not in title or accent, but in moral construction. Men who believed if they arranged words correctly, consequence itself could be negotiated. Then Clara asked the question Rowan had not known he'd been waiting to hear. Mr. Voss, did you, or did you not, transport Rook away from White Pine Hollow during the snow event on the day Mr. Hale returned? Gideon's attorney objected. Judge Mercer overruled. Gideon's face did not break, but Rowan saw the smallest alteration in his jaw. I did not abandon that dog, Gideon said. It was not an answer. Clara did not press theatrically. She simply introduced the timing evidence. Fuel receipt records. A camera still from the County Road fuel station showing Gideon's SUV heading north, then west on the afternoon the storm worsened, and Mabel's statement placing the vehicle backed near the side yard shortly before the weather turned. None of it alone could prove the whole act. Together, it formed an outline hard to miss. By then, Rowan's pulse had gone slow. When Clara called him, he stood, crossed the room, and took the witness chair as if entering a place that had already chosen whether to accept him. He gave his name, his profession, former and current, the dates of departure, the broken chain of communications, the day of return, the place on County Road 8 where he found Rook. He kept his hands still because they wanted not to be. Then Clara asked him what mattered. What did it mean to you, she said, to find the dog where you found him? Rowan looked once toward Rook, who lay on his blanket beside the counsel table, head up, eyes open, as if following every voice in the room. It meant he was trying to come home, Rowan said. No one interrupted. He turned, then, not fully toward Gideon, not fully toward Elise, but toward the place in the room where truth and shame had been forced to sit side by side. That dog didn't leave our house, Rowan said. His voice remained level, which somehow made every word hit harder. He was seen around that property over and over. fed nearby, sleeping nearby, returning to that porch until he was too weak to stand properly. The one day he's found miles from the only ground he kept trying to get back to is the day a storm closes in and this man's vehicle is moving out on the roads where it has no ordinary reason to be. He let the silence gather around the next sentence. He did not go there because he stopped loving home. He was taken far enough that someone hoped weather would finish what cowardice had started. No one objected. Even Gideon's attorney remained still. Judge Mercer wrote something down. Clara said nothing. She did not need to. By late afternoon, the court issued the temporary orders. All current or pending actions affecting the Hale property and its associated access discussions were frozen pending further review. No additional changes to the residence or land would be permitted. Rowan Hale's right of access and temporary control over the home was restored while the dispute proceeded. Further inquiry into the redirection of correspondence and the circumstances surrounding the dog's condition was referred outward. It was not final victory. It was, however, the first official refusal to let the lie keep speaking uninterrupted. Outside the courthouse, the wind had risen again. Rowan carried the paperwork in a plain manila folder that felt lighter than it should have. Rook stood beside him on the steps, unsteady but upright. The black harness snugger now than when all this began. His breath smoked in little white bursts. People moved around them with the awkwardness of those who know they have witnessed something intimate in public and do not yet know where to place their eyes. Clara paused beside Rowan, gloved hands in the pockets of her coat. "This is only the beginning," she said. "I know." She looked down at Rook. "He's inconveniently good for your case." Rowan exhaled, something almost like a laugh but more tired. "He was always good." Clara's expression did not exactly soften. It clarified. "Yes," she said. "That appears to be the problem." She walked away toward her car without another word. Rowan stood there a while longer, one hand resting lightly on Rook's neck. The courthouse behind him, the road north waiting under a skin of ice and light. He had not yet reclaimed his life. Not really. But for the first time since the blizzard, the world had done more than witness what was wrong. It had begun, however reluctantly, to answer it. The house did not welcome Rowan Hale back with revelation. It welcomed him with dust-cold corners and the ordinary silence of rooms that had spent too long absorbing lies. By the time he returned to White Pine Hollow with the court papers in a plain manila folder on the passenger seat, the afternoon light had begun thinning toward blue. Winter sunset in the north did not descend so much as withdraw, taking warmth with it in deliberate handfuls. Rook lay on the blanket beside him, too tired from the day to hold himself upright for long, but awake enough to keep lifting his head whenever the truck slowed, as if some part of him still could not believe roads were allowed to end in safety. Rowan turned into the lane more slowly than he had on the night of the blizzard. The maple out front stood silvered with ice, the branches clicking softly in the wind. The porch light, still that cold white bulb Voss had chosen, was not yet on. The SUV was gone. Elise's car remained in the drive, dusted lightly with fresh powder, but the place looked stripped of force, as if the court order had taken more than authority from it. It had taken momentum. Rook rose before Rowan fully opened the door. "Easy," Rowan murmured automatically, but the dog was already shifting forward, careful and stiff, every movement betraying how much the body still hurt. Rowan slid an arm under the harness to steady him. The German shepherd's weight leaned into him, not heavily, but with the trusting fatigue of a creature who had finally decided he did not have to keep standing through everything alone. Together, they crossed the yard. The boards of the front porch gave their old familiar groan under Rowan's boots, and the sound hit him harder than the hearing had. There were noises the body remembered before the mind had time to prepare itself. This was one of them. He had come home to this house in rain, in bright summer dusk, once with a split lip and bruised ribs after a bad training accident. Once carrying paint samples Elise laughed at because all of them looked military sad. And always, before all of this, Rook had reached the door first. Now the dog stopped at the threshold and stood still. Rowan unlocked the new deadbolt with the temporary access key issued under court authority. Even the turn of the lock felt unnatural in his hand. Metal, legal, granted. Not his own key. Not yet. Not the simple rightness of belonging. When the door opened, The house gave back a breath of heat, long gone stale. The entry smelled faintly of cedar polish, radiator dust, and a floral detergent Elise had once used sparingly because she said too much sweetness in the air made a room feel like it was trying to hide something. Rowan stood there with one hand on the knob and a strange reluctance in his chest. Winning access was not the same as wanting to walk in. Some thresholds cut both ways. Rook crossed first. His paws moved slowly over the floorboards, each step testing memory against reality. He lowered his nose to the rug, then the wall trim, then the base of the coat rack that used to hold Rowan's old field jacket before it had been exiled to the shed. He did not wag. He did not spin or whine in joy. He investigated the house like a survivor returning to the site of an explosion, cataloging what remained and what had been rearranged by those who came after. That hurt Rowan more than any dramatic reunion could have. He shut the door behind them. The living room looked almost like itself from a distance, and not at all like itself up close. The couch had been reupholstered. The lamp near the window was new. His shadow box was still gone from the wall. In its place hung the same landscape print, all decorative pines and borrowed peace. The changes were not loud. That was their cruelty. They suggested substitution, not destruction. A life improved upon. A man edited out. He set the manila folder on the table and said the words aloud because the house seemed to require witness. "I'm back." The silence that followed was not mystical. It was just wood and insulation and old grief. But speaking still changed something inside him. Not healed, not redeemed, only named. Behind him, Rook had made his way to the fireplace. The dog lowered himself carefully onto the hearth rug and exhaled through his nose in a long, fragile breath, as if some part of him, some stubborn, watchful part that had endured snow, hunger, engines, and exile, had recognized this one square of floor as enough to rest on at last. Rowan stood looking at him for a long moment, then moved through the house opening curtains, checking windows, testing the locks. Not because he was afraid Voss would burst in that second, but because motion had always been his way of getting his bearings. The kitchen drawers had been reorganized. Bills sat stacked in a basket on the counter, some in Elise's neat angled handwriting, some official and cold. The bedroom they had once shared was made too neatly. A cardigan of Elise's still hung over the chair by the window. Her presence remained everywhere in small domestic ghosts. It was less like she had vanished, and more like she had been interrupted in the act of continuing without him. He found her at last in the back sunroom. She sat in the wicker chair by the frosted glass, still wearing the camel coat she had worn to court, though it was unbuttoned now. Her hands were bare, wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. The failing light made her look younger and more tired at the same time. Chestnut hair had loosened at the nape, one strand against her cheek. Her face had the drawn softness of someone who had cried in private and then been too drained to arrange herself afterward. She did not startle when he entered. That meant she had heard him come in and chosen not to flee. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me," she said. Rowan stayed standing. "Were you wondering?" he asked. "Or deciding whether to speak before I asked the wrong questions first?" A tired smile touched one corner of her mouth and vanished. "You always did think like an ambush. That kept me alive." Her eyes lifted to him then, and for the first time in days he saw not just guilt in them but weariness so deep it looked almost like surrender. "I know," she said. There was a version of this moment Rowan had imagined in anger. In that version he accused, she denied, and everything became clean in its ugliness. But real pain almost never offered that kind of order. It sat between people in all the places where love used to be and asked whether they had the courage to stop lying now that lying no longer worked. Elise put the mug down on the side table with both hands. "I didn't think you were dead," she said quietly. "Not exactly. That would have been simpler." Rowan said nothing. "I thought you were gone in a way that amounted to the same thing," she continued. "No clear answer. No body. No date to grieve. Just bills, silence, and everyone telling me to be strong when all they really meant was quiet." Outside the glass, snow shifted from a branch and fell in one soft slide. "He helped," she said. And the word seemed to shame her as soon as it was spoken. At first he really did. He knew how to talk to the bank. He explained the tax letters. He knew who to call when the pipes nearly froze. He made decisions quickly. I was so tired of being the only one making any. Gideon, Rowan said. She nodded. And Rook? That was where her face changed, not into innocence, not even into defense, into the naked knowledge of a wound she had looked away from too long. He kept coming back, she whispered. Every time Gideon sent him off the porch, he came back. Every time I thought maybe if I didn't see it, it would stop, he came back. Rowan's hands curled at his sides. He said the dog made everything harder, Elise said. That as long as Rook kept showing up, people would keep talking, keep looking, keep reminding me. She broke off. Reminding you of what? Of you, she said. And now there were tears in her eyes, though they did not make her prettier, only more human. Of the fact that I had not finished choosing. Rowan looked away for 1 second, because the truth of that was uglier than any lie she might have offered. A soft sound from the doorway made both of them turn. Rook stood there. No one had called him. No one had touched him awake. Yet somehow, despite the soreness in his leg and the exhaustion pulling at every line of his body, he had come to the sunroom and was standing between them. Not growling, not trembling, only looking. His amber eyes moved from Elise to Rowan and back again, with the solemn gravity of a witness who had endured too much to waste energy on theatrics. Then, with painful care, he crossed the room and lowered himself at Rowan's feet. Not Elise's, the gesture was small, quiet. Final. Elise put a hand over her mouth. Rowan felt the old battlefield knowledge return in a form he had never expected. There are moments when no shot is fired, yet the truth still lands with devastating accuracy. He took him away, Rowan said, voice low. Elise closed her eyes. That was answer enough. When? The day the storm came in. Her voice shook now. He said he was going to drive him farther out past the timber road, somewhere he couldn't just circle back by evening. She drew in a breath that seemed to hurt. He said if the dog kept returning, the town would never let things settle. He said Rook was ruining any chance of normal. Rowan stood very still because movement at that moment felt dangerous. Did you stop him? Her silence stretched too long. I asked him not to make it cruel, she said finally, and the sentence was so weak, so monstrous in its weakness, that it almost emptied the room of air. Rowan's face changed then, not into rage exactly, but into something far colder. A look Elise recognized and flinched from, not the expression of a husband betrayed, but of a man discovering the full shape of another person's moral collapse. He tied the leash around his hand, she whispered. Rook trusted car rides. That was the worst part. He still trusted. Tears slid down her face unchecked now. I told myself Gideon would leave him somewhere sheltered. A farm road. A barn. I knew that was probably a lie, but I let myself believe it because the other possibility meant that you were standing in the house while he got rid of the one living thing still waiting for me. She bowed her head. Rowan did not shout. He did not need to. He had learned a long time ago that some truths were best spoken with the least possible force, so they could not be mistaken for performance. I could have understood you being lonely, he said. I could have understood you being angry. I could even have understood you deciding you couldn't live in my absence anymore. His throat tightened once, but his voice held. What I cannot understand is watching loyalty suffer and calling that the price of peace. Elise cried then with the broken, unguarded sound of someone no longer trying to look composed. But Rowan found that pity would not come. Not yet. Perhaps not ever in the form she wanted. What remained between them was not hatred. Hate had too much heat in it. This was colder. Recognition. The final knowing of who she had become while he was gone. He bent and touched Rook's neck lightly, fingers moving over the stronger warmth there, the life still present in spite of everything. The dog leaned into his shin. I'm not asking you to leave tonight, Rowan said, still looking at Rook. The court order will decide the timetable. Clara will tell you what happens next. He straightened. But whatever story you were telling yourself to survive this, stop. At least stop that. Elise said nothing. She was crying too hard for speech, and perhaps at last understood that tears were no longer currency here. Rowan took the mug from the side table and set it more securely down because small practical acts were all that kept his hands from remembering violence. Then he turned and walked out of the sunroom with Rook following more slowly behind. Dusk had thickened through the house by then. The rooms were blue with it. Rowan switched on only the lights he needed. The lamp near the fireplace. The one over the kitchen sink. The porch light outside. Not the cold white bulb Voss had chosen. He unscrewed that one himself and replaced it with an old amber bulb from the utility drawer that somehow still remained. When the warm gold spread over the porch boards, something in the front of the house eased. Rook noticed it too. He stood at the threshold for a long minute, looking out into the evening as if comparing this light to another version of the world he had nearly lost. Then he stepped onto the porch, turned once in a small circle, and lay down with his body toward the yard and the lane beyond, like a sentinel resuming a post he had been denied too long. Snow began again, soft and sparse. Rowan stood behind him in the open doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame, and understood that he was not getting his old life back. That house had been used, altered, tested by weakness and cruelty both. The marriage inside it had broken in ways the law could not repair, but on the porch, under the amber light, one loyal creature had come all the way back from abandonment, and was still willing to guard what remained. That had to mean something. Not mercy exactly, not yet, but maybe the beginning of a truer kind of home. This story reminds us that sometimes a miracle does not arrive like thunder from the sky. Sometimes it comes quietly on wounded legs, through the snow, carrying just enough faith to lead a broken heart back to the truth. Maybe that is how God works more often than we realize. Not always by removing the storm, but by sending us the strength, the sign, or the faithful soul that keeps us moving, until morning comes. In everyday life, many people are fighting silent battles. Some are carrying grief. Some are waiting to be noticed. Some are trying to find their way back after being pushed farther than they ever should have been. A kind word, an open door, a second chance, or even the courage to stand beside someone in their pain can become the very answer they have been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or tell us about an animal, a person, or a moment in your life that felt like God's mercy arriving at just the right time. And if you believe in stories of loyalty, healing, second chances, and quiet courage, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more. May God bless every person watching, protect your home, strengthen your heart, guide your steps when the road feels dark, and place faithful love beside you when you need it most.